Hi everyone, this is Kareem, the voice of Simon Fairchild from the Magnus Archives. And today I want to talk to you about Boost Mobile. Some things quietly drain you, like an expensive phone bill trapping your money month after month. Here's a quick money tip. Stop paying a carrier tax. When you bring your own phone and switch to Boost Mobile's $25 unlimited forever plan, you can unlock up to $600 in savings. That's money that belongs in your life, not trapped in a phone bill. Reclaim those savings for something you're actually into. An EMF meter, a thermal camera, or whatever strange corner of the universe you're currently exploring. Visit boostmobile.com to unlock your savings and take back control. After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers pay $25 per month as long as they remain active on the Boost Mobile Unlimited plan. Boost Mobile January 2026 survey comparing average annual payments of AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile customers to 12 months on the Boost Mobile Unlimited plan. For full offer details, visit boostmobile.com.
Hi, it's Matt here from P1 with Matt and Tommy, and this episode is sponsored by eBay. Ever tried to buy a car online and end up in a parking lot with a stranger, a paper title, and some blind trust? With Secure Purchase on eBay, you don't have to. Secure Purchase means sellers and titles are verified. Financing covered. Registration handled. Delivery, get your ride, plates, and paperwork shipped to you, so you can skip the DMV and sketchy meetups. Buy your next car on eBay. eBay. Things people love. Secure Purchase is powered by Caramel Dealer Services, LLC, an eBay subsidiary.
Welcome again to the Explaining History podcast, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Monica Sandler, film and media historian at Ball State University, currently working on a new manuscript for a book, The Oscar Industry, which is in process. But perhaps more topically, we are approaching the Oscars on Sunday. The annual the annual awards ceremony for the film industry, and it gives us an opportunity, I think, to talk about the Oscars and film in a broader a way that helps us to explore the kind of social tensions that we can examine through film and through how we reward film. And I wanted to start with a question. So my son is 11 years old and currently fixated with all things superhero. And on our drive to school in the morning, I mean, he will bombard me with endless questions on the subject. But he asked me, do superhero films win Oscars? And I thought, well, That's a good question, and probably not really. I mean, perhaps, for the special effects or soundtracks. And I thought actually there's something really interesting in that there is a certain kind of formation of film, a bit like the way we imagine sort of literary fiction. There is a certain that Oscar-winning films have to have certain things in them, and I know, for example, Lord of the Rings won the Oscars, but that's quite an outlier. So the first question I wonder is, what are the kind of almost the invisible criteria that make an Oscar-worthy film?
Mhm. Yeah, and certainly there are not very many instances of superhero movies being successful at the Oscars. The really big and only example, at least in the major categories, is Black Panther, um, which so that's kind of the
Yeah,
underlying. That was more of a cultural phenomenon that I think helped propel it into Best Picture and other varying other categories. They do, as you kind of indicated, do well in the technical categories, special effects types categories, because they're so heavily reliant on
yeah,
special effects. So that is a really, it is one of those, like, there's this constant debate over, like, why doesn't the Academy reward more movies that people actually watch? That comes up a lot, almost on a yearly basis. We're fortunate this year, like, Sinners was a very, also
yeah,
by Ryan Coogler, financially successful movie. Last year, Wicked was a front runner. It got 0 nominations, the part two this year. So you kind of go back and forth between
mm,
that. But I think there is a tendency to overlook really mainstream movies and not see the merit in them historically. They're
yeah,
also notoriously, The Dark Knight did not get nominated for Best Picture when it came out in 2008,
mm,
which Academy, because they have such a problem, they overhauled their policy on the Best Picture category a year later, and they expanded it from 5 to 10 films, and they've
yeah,
done different variations of that, because there is this sort of view that mainstream cinema isn't necessarily what's going on, like what gets celebrated, or it doesn't get seen as having artistic merit. And it's paradoxical because the Academy like needs people to watch the show, and if you reward films that people actually watch, they're more likely to turn into the program. And yeah, go ahead.
no, no, you carry on. Sorry,
I was going to say with this, there is the economic model that's involved in this that I always think is important,
hmm,
is that when you have smaller films that are going out for awards consideration, they're part of these really long and frankly expensive campaigns that they're going through, but this is how you ensure that those films become profitable. So
right,
this so a superhero movie doesn't necessarily need the best picture victory in order to be financially successful, but this smaller films, the ones that are pretentious or don't have as large of audiences, this is how you ensure they're financially profitable, and then also frankly that they continue to get made, or bought at film festivals depending on where they come from. So there is this sort of who's being economically supported and what's the most
right.
viable. So
There's a huge kind of sort of voluminous literature written when you're exploring mass culture on the gatekeepers and the arbiters of taste almost. If you go all the way back to the birth of mass culture at the 19th, and then it's kind of apogee in the 20th century, you find all sorts of people when you're talking about mass publishing or later on television, explaining to the common man what is good. And
mhm.
I know the Oscars began life as a sort of almost like an in-house industry sort of backslapping kind of it was an inter-industry dialogue almost. But now, do you have people who exist to give awards to kind of almost discern what is good taste? What is kind of in a thing that is mass culture, the kind of like the bit of that we think of as being high culture. Is that
Mhm.
sort of what's happening here?
Yeah, so that really takes me back to the founding of the Academy, actually, and like what were the Oscars originally intended to do. And so they're it's sort of twofold on this front. The first is, as you kind of indicated, like this is an award show that is celebrating workers in an industry. So there is sort of this workers award component where you're singling out individuals who are studio
Mm.
employees at that time. There's so small selection of studios and they are across different companies, but it's a very select group of people in a very specific field, most of whom are in Los Angeles and a little bit in New York, basically. So there's that element of, it being workers oriented, but really what the Oscars become is they're the first like mass culture award show. There are like little iterations before this, but like taking the full force of what Hollywood and popular entertainment is really starts with the Oscars in 1929. And
Right.
there's this really great speech where the awards are talked about. There's this big problem in Hollywood where it's viewed as film is being viewed as lowbrow at that point. It's not
Mm.
labeled as an art form. This is a big problem also, particularly in relation to censorship. Because there's a decision in 1915 called the Mutual Decision, which labeled the industry or film an industry plain and simple, and declared that the industry was not entitled to First Amendment protections. This is
Right.
the bane of Hollywood's existence for most of the studio era until 1953. But at the center of this is the launch of the Academy as this direct attempt to redefine film as an art form. There's a number of other elements of that, actually. Like, I am a professor in film and media studies. Film and media studies is a byproduct of like Hollywood directly like reaching out to universities and trying to create curriculum to be like, hey, like we're important enough to be universities. We should
Yeah.
be seen as an art form. um, but one thing that immediately came into my mind when you were talking about like arbiters of taste is this amazing speech that Will Hayes, who is the head of the production code office that is sort of regulating censorship in the industry, he gives a speech at the 1930 ceremony where he talks about the awards. He refers to them as an educator of public taste, that they're designed to the so-called best in the industry, which is what the Academy membership composed of, sort of making annual declarations to the public about what like good taste looks like in the industry and how great cinema is. There's something very like elitist about all of that, as though they are arbiters of taste.
Yeah.
But he makes sort of direct distinction in that. And the rise of other awards, particularly the first kind of critics award is the New York Film Critics Circle Awards, which is in 1936. And when they announce, they literally are like, we're better suited to make statements about what good films look like than the Academy is, and that they're constantly wrong. And that is sort of how the award season starts, is the Academy starts. Everyone's like, no, you were just completely out of touch. And that's sort of the tradition of the Oscars and the discourse.
And that, I mean, that kind of taste gatekeeping, that sort of elitism. I mean, wherever you look in this kind of modern age in which we live in of mass culture, there is a version of that. There are uh everybody, there are film critics, literary critics, TV critics, there are, I mean, the birth of the restaurant critic was about, people being able to afford to eat in restaurants and reading in newspapers, what good eating kind of is like. And so I suppose mass culture and that kind of arbiter, um, they go hand in hand, really. I mean, audiences become more sophisticated every time, and I suppose things like now Rotten Tomatoes and the internet have democratized film criticism to such an extent that probably if you're trying to put a bad film forward for an Academy Award, it's already the audience has already decided. But have has the internet and things like that changed the Oscars?
Mm-hmm. I think it, in some ways, well, at first I was like, how does it work? And then I literally like, there's a very blatant example of that literally happening, which is the Oscar So White controversy in 2016, where literally there is, after 2 years where there were no people of color nominated in any of the acting categories, the Academy overhauled its membership because there was such a backlash and outcry, particularly coming directly from social media movements.
Mm-hmm.
So the entire basis of like how the Academy has reorganized itself is directly coming from kind of a reaction to the discourse online and to the this exact democratization of media that you were just talking about. And so that's been really transformative. That was 10 years ago, exactly when they announced they were going to double diversity in their membership by 2020, which they did accomplish. It should be noted at that time, they were 90% white. They were
Mm.
about 75% male as well, and the average age was about 65. So that in of itself, there are multiple dimensions to why they were out of touch at
Yeah.
that particular cultural moment. So that in and of itself, like, there's perhaps been nothing that has impacted the Oscars more than that particular social media movement.
On that very topic, about kind of whiteness and the Oscars, um, throughout most of its existence, the Oscars has been a, if essentially, for want of a better word, a white institution. It has been a predominantly white um, celebration of white artists and white directors. There are, notable exceptions like Hattie McDaniel and Sidney Poitier and people like that. Um, and does that reflect a broader kind of institutional racism that's always existed within Hollywood?
Yeah, I think that it there's a lot of exclusionary policies, particularly in classic Hollywood, that are directly codified into the industry. So it's not just like that it's an exclusionary industry in terms of opportunity, but it's also exclusionary in terms of content. One thing that like the production code did that is really significant and that directly affected content and opportunity for people of color was that they the production code barred miscegenation on screen, so you could not have interracial
Yeah.
romances in film. But that basically, like, how many classic Hollywood movies don't have a romance at the lead, basically? But that essentially relegated minority groups like to every type of supporting character because they couldn't be a love interest if there was going to be an interracial relationship overall. And like the first person of color ever nominated for an Oscar, her name was Meryl Oberon. She was nominated in 1936 for her role in a film called Dark Angel. She's of Indian descent. However, she presented herself in kind of to the public as being British. And basically, so she is an instance of passing in Hollywood, so no
Mm.
one knew about her racial identity. So the first person of color who was ever nominated was an instance where that she would not have been able to play the role she was playing. It's a movie about a love triangle
Mm.
based off of the code if she had actually been, open about her identity. I think she's a really important figure that often gets lost in conversations.
Mhm. Um, and with the kind of, I mean, it's obviously we can't predict what's going to happen on Sunday, but we now exist on the other side of the Oscars are white movement, and we exist on the other side of the Me Too moment as well.
Mhm.
I mean, to what extent do you think that the Oscars and kind of the broader film industry have actually changed in a meaningful way to these things?
Mhm.
And to what extent is it that the film industry has kind of absorbed that moment and kind of resisted it? I mean, where it's a big question, I know, but where do you think it stands there?
Mhm. In terms of Oscar So White, it's like the answer I would say is like it's really complicated. Like Hollywood, I think we can see that there have been transformations to,
Mm.
the opportunity just to the types of stories that we see regularly. Sinners being a really good example of that this year. However, like, did the Academy drastically transform Hollywood? No. Do they have the power and influence to actually do something like that? Absolutely not. The main thing that they did do after Oscar So White was, rather than, looking for diversity in Hollywood, they became a more global organization.
Hmm.
And that led to a film like Parasite winning Best Picture in 2020, which was unheard of at previous moments in history. But that is a different issue than what was being drawn attention to. I think, you brought up the Me Too movement, which I'm really glad that you did, because the Oscars are so centrally connected to the Me Too movement, yet they don't necessarily get talked about in that context. Because really, the rise of the modern aggressive film campaigning around the ceremony all really comes back to Harvey Weinstein, and the work of Miramax in the 1990s. Films like notoriously Shakespeare in Love. But usually, and I've taught this in my classes, I literally put up a map of like films that he was releasing, their awards campaigns, and like a sexual assault allegations and when they were occurring. And essentially what happened was he became the kingmaker in the industry. He built up the modern award season campaign, these aggressive millions and millions of dollars campaigns that now define how films are successful.
Hmm.
And that legacy, I mean, he of course has been barred from the academy. He is in prison, but that built the kind of economic model of how the
Right.
award season continues to exist. And because he was a kingmaker, he like was untouchable for years, and so many people who came forward with allegations rather faced career setbacks, and that is intertwined with the legacy of what the Oscars are ultimately. That was his thing. He was the awards guy.
So he's, I mean, in some ways, I mean, this is not to go off on a kind of like a tangent, but he's slightly analogous to kind of Hollywood's Trump almost. He sort of sees institutions that are relatively malleable, and assaults them, and people as well, obviously. But the Oscars as this, as as I said, this kind of strange amalgam of originally kind of industry institution that becomes again this gatekeeper of good taste, and becomes something that's really sought after. Harvey Weinstein is able to, setting aside all his other vile crimes, bombard it with these sort of sustained campaigns to influence campaigns that I'm guessing that hadn't happened before. There hadn't been somebody like that before. Is he sort of like kind of was he sort of like the kind of like the progenitor of that sort of influence campaign?
Yeah, so he takes a structure that already existed and like accelerates it up to 11,
Right,
basically. So like awards campaigning really like starts in the 30s and 40s. The Academy puts in place like what's referred to as the Academy Awards ad code, because people were doing blatant false advertising in the 40s about films that like hadn't won awards, that they were Oscar films and things like that. So like the structures of using the awards in, I don't want to say like inappropriate ways or false advertising, like that had already existed, and like the idea of campaigning for an award existed. And what Weinstein did was just turn it up. He basically built these kind of brutal campaigns, whisper campaigns, negative ad attack ads against other competitors. Generally, if you go to the Academy website, there's a rule, like a list of rules for what you can and cannot do for campaigns. A
right.
large portion of them was like, Weinstein did this last year, and now we have to put a rule in place because no one had ever thought to do that before. Because at one point, he was individually soliciting voters by phone. His team, for at one point the Shakespeare in Love campaign being really significant, holding screenings at retirement communities that were known to have a large number of members. So this is sort of the extreme degree that he's directly targeting voters, with why you should vote for his film specifically. And you can't do that anymore, or you're not supposed to. Your film can get disqualified if you do things like that.
I mean, obviously, we all live kind of in a sort of like I say a post Me Too moment. I don't think the Me Too moment is in any way over. I just think perhaps the kind of the media focus on it has dissipated, but there are, still very famous and high profile people, be it whose crimes and misdemeanors against women are being revealed. Um, and not to go too broadly into how Me Too has transformed societies across the world, but to focus on Hollywood, is there a sense that Hollywood and the mainly the American film industry exists in a kind of a sort of like a post Me Too era, that the horrible, awful things that are being revealed have led to fundamental changes, so that life for women on set and all the way down to people working in the cafeteria is safer, or is it still, or is it still all really rather precarious?
Mm.
What's your
So,
sense?
I mean, my sense is that it has gotten better to a certain extent. I mean, I think there are questions about people who've had allegations at them. So, like, how has that affected individual careers? Um, how it's changed day to day, I don't think there's the same level of fear. However, I mean, I used to work in the industry. I don't work in the industry anymore. And so I don't know what it is like currently kind of on the ground. I mean, I can say in my own experience, when I worked my first Sundance Film Festival, that like I was told by an advisor, like, if you see Harvey Weinstein, go in the other direction. So it was unsaid. It was said but unsaid, and everyone knew, but no one was willing to see it or say it, because I experienced that directly. And I can't speak to what it's like on the ground now, because
Sure.
an old fogey professor now who spends time in archives. So certainly the hope, at least, is that there are more protections that are in place, and there have been additions of things like intimacy quarters to try and combat that. Though there is some question about, is that to protect the people who are in the scenes, or is that to protect the production from legal liability?
Well, I mean, and often two things can be true at once, I suppose. I mean, in the era that we're in now, with streaming TV and declining cinema audiences, I mean, do you see the Oscars' relevancy declining? I mean, will we be talking about the Oscars in 20 years' time, or is this sort of a kind of a hangover from the popular culture of the 20th century?
Hi everyone, this is Kareem, the voice of Simon Fairchild from the Magnus Archives. And today I want to talk to you about Boost Mobile. Some things quietly drain you, like an expensive phone bill trapping your money month after month. Here's a quick money tip. Stop paying a carrier tax. When you bring your own phone and switch to Boost Mobile's $25 unlimited forever plan, you can unlock up to $600 in savings. That's money that belongs in your life, not trapped in a phone bill. Reclaim those savings for something you're actually into. An EMF meter, a thermal camera, or whatever strange corner of the universe you're currently exploring. Visit boostmobile.com to unlock your savings and take back control. After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers pay $25 per month as long as they remain active on the Boost Mobile Unlimited plan. Boost Mobile January 2026 survey comparing average annual payments of AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile customers to 12 months on the Boost Mobile Unlimited plan. For full offer details, visit boostmobile.com.
Hi, it's Matt here from P1 with Matt and Tommy, and this episode is sponsored by eBay. Ever tried to buy a car online and end up in a parking lot with a stranger, a paper title, and some blind trust? With Secure Purchase on eBay, you don't have to. Secure Purchase means sellers and titles are verified. Financing covered. Registration handled. Delivery, get your ride, plates, and paperwork shipped to you, so you can skip the DMV and sketchy meetups. Buy your next car on eBay. eBay. Things people love. Secure Purchase is powered by Caramel Dealer Services, LLC, an eBay subsidiary.
Hey, this is Paige DeSorbo from Giggly Squad, and today I want to talk to you about Boost Mobile. Quick question, why are we letting our phone bills bully us? Here's a money tip. Stop paying a carrier tax. When you bring your own phone and switch to Boost Mobile's $25 unlimited forever plan, you can unlock up to $600 in savings. That's real-life money, not money trapped in a pricey phone bill. $600 is a trip, a shopping spree, or paying something off. Your money belongs in your life. You get unlimited data, talk, and text for $25 a month with no contracts and no minimum line requirements. Your phone, your rules. Head to boostmobile.com to switch today and unlock the savings you actually deserve. After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience lower speed. Customers pay $25 per month while active on Boost Mobile Unlimited plan. Savings claim based on a January 2026 Boost Mobile survey comparing average annual payments of major carrier customers to 12 months on the Boost Mobile Unlimited plan. Visit boostmobile.com for details.
So it's kind of two things that I think about in this. One is like, what is the future of film as a medium? And the Oscars, of course, are intricately tied to that. And there's the future of just prizes more broadly, and what's going to happen with that. So one thing that can be really seen, like Best Picture winner last year, Nora, basically was a small, low-budget film that was bought at a film festival, became financially successful because of its success at the awards. And so that really showcases like this is a system that still works and it allows for that opportunity for a film to find a market for it. So the economic model still stands, at least in terms of how the industry is working today. There's still declining theatrical, and that's kind of omnipresent. So there is the questionability about like how relevant is film. I mean, one thing I always say with the ceremony is television, like traditional television, is on the decline. Broadcasting, the ceremony is on the decline. Social media moments from award shows go very, very viral. So if we equate them very differently, like Michael B. Jordan winning at the Actors Awards a couple weeks ago, like that was like incredibly visible. How many people were watching the Actor Awards? Not necessarily the same number of people that saw that particular moment, which was really powerful. And Viola Davis's reaction, because she opened the envelope, was like very emotional. It was wonderful. So there is sort of how do we translate our understanding of the cultural impact of awards, and I think they still exist. The final thing in that conversation, though, is the role that awards are playing for honoring creative labor in the industry, which is to say the kind of the Actors Awards for the Screen Actors Guild, the Directors Guild Awards, some of the ACE, American Cinema Editors, Eddie Awards that are given out to so many different sectors of the field. Like they're rewarding a workforce, and the way individuals work in film production, they're working as independent contractors, job to job, and that form of recognition is very significant in terms of picking up work, and more importantly, picking up work for the rest of your team. So if you're a cinematographer, it's not just you, it's a group of people who work for you. And that baseline is why the awards kind of become so vital to the role of the industry. And I think that's the thing that's kind of always going to be present within the structures, is what role they're playing for those on the ground who are actually working in Hollywood. So as long as that's going to be essential, which I think is just so fundamentally a part of how the industry works, there will continue to be, well, how do we profit off of them simultaneously coming from producers, which is also the paradox of like workers awards, is that they're singling out workers in the industry, but those who profit most off of it are like the executives and the producers on the films, because they're using it to market and promote their films.
That's essentially how capitalism is structured. So
that is true, but that is omnipresent in there.
And the thing, again, if we talk about those workers, I mean, obviously life is becoming increasingly precarious for many of them in the age of AI. And you've seen there is a periodic outburst of militancy amongst them, with writers strikes and studio strikes and things like that. And you have the odd kind of A-list person. I think Margot Robbie was took to the picket lines, which I hugely admired her for, and Mark Ruffalo, and then there's a few people like that. But for the most part, those are kind of real outliers. And is the future for kind of film industry rank and file workers, is it looking particularly bleak, do we think?
It's not a great time to be working in the industry. I mean, this is something I talk to my students about when I teach media industries classes. It's just like it's incredibly competitive and it's rapidly transforming at the moment. I mean, in addition, the industry since 2020 has had really extreme setbacks between first the pandemic, and then the strikes, the fires in California as well, and then AI on top of everything else, and attempting to make things as financially efficient as possible, or the view that they can eliminate things. And that was at the center of the Writers and Actors Guild strikes in 2023. But they're going up for contract negotiations again this year. And this is like, how do we maintain job opportunities for people? So it's a time of real disarray in the industry. And one of the things that gets often lost in this discussion is like, where are people watching content? And I know amongst my students, like, it's on YouTube. They're not necessarily watching Hollywood content. So there are, direct competitors with this democratization of media that are just, people who are creative at home, perhaps using their phones, using Zoom, things like that to make content.
And I guess if you are the head of a major Hollywood studio, there are probably not many easy answers to that, other than possibly license your IP to YouTube and let people do what they want with it, and hopefully that's the money making model of the future. I think that I think this is Matthew McConaughey has recently signed a deal with 11 Labs to license his voice, and he said kind of ominously that you're not going to, this is the last paycheck anyone's going to get from movies. People in 5 years time, people will just be making blockbuster movies on their phones, which maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't, I don't know, and maybe that's not in any way desirable. But is there just a sense from at the moment that the future is completely unknown?
Yeah, it is really unstable, and
Hi, it's Matt here from P1 with Matt and Tommy, and this episode is sponsored by eBay. Ever tried to buy a car online and end up in a parking lot with a stranger, a paper title, and some blind trust? With Secure Purchase on eBay, you don't have to. Secure Purchase means sellers and titles are verified. Financing covered. Registration handled. Delivery, get your ride, plates, and paperwork shipped to you, so you can skip the DMV and sketchy meetups. Buy your next car on eBay. eBay. Things people love. Secure Purchase is powered by Caramel Dealer Services, LLC, an eBay subsidiary.
Also have to bring in factors like the way the media conglomerates are merging, things like the Paramount merger, the Warner Brothers being up for sale and now being bought by Paramount, and it was Netflix before. But there's consolidation happening, and with that comes a lot of layoffs as well. So it's a really turbulent time in the industry, and who knows if other media conglomerates may go for sale. There may be more consolidation. What does all of that mean, basically?
And with that, I mean, obviously the thing that changes Hollywood is the kind of an antitrust law right at the very beginning that stops these kind of vertical integrations from studio all the way down to theatre on the street. But we seem to have gone always with these gigantic now media conglomerates. We're almost going full circle back to that moment of kind of media oligarchies, or almost. And the alarming thing, of course, is that the new owners of these vast conglomerates almost exclusively sit in the White House. Well, welcome in the White House to see Donald Trump for his various kind of propaganda wheezes. So it presents, I mean, again, this is a wholly different conversation, but that kind of concentration of media power is a very, very troubling development. before we finish, I know it's not completely written yet, but perhaps we could talk a bit about the book, about the Oscar industry, and we'll give it a pre-launch plug here. So tell us about the book, about the thesis behind it.
Yeah, so the book I'm adapting from my dissertation, because when I did my doctorate at UCLA, and during that time I wrote specifically about the Academy. I was given access to internal files that had previously been classified at the Academy, and just looked at thousands of documents and internal records about that allowed me to see not just like what happened, but why it happened. So you have meetings notes where people kind of get into a random argument and suddenly this is policy. And it feels really arbitrary. And when you look at the meetings, it's like, oh, it really was. Like the conversation just veered, and now this is why they do the things that they do. And so that was what was really fascinating about it, but it helped to build up the project. My kind of way into it, I've been fascinated with the Oscars for really as long as I can remember. It was always just like my thing, even as a kid. So if you asked me in high school, you're going to write a book someday, I know I would have said it was going to be on the Academy Awards. So it's just sort of compounded and built from there. A lot of it is that there's very little writing in academic literature about the Academy Awards. There is a ton of non-academic writing.
Yeah.
Like so much, but very little in academic literature. So when I was thinking about going back for my PhD, I started looking at what existed, and it wasn't there. And I was, wait, I can actually fill the hole about the Oscar. Like I get to do it. Oh my gosh. So that was the baseline for it.
And it is surprising that hole was there, because if you kind of look beyond the kind of the ceremony itself, and look even beyond, when I walk past a movie poster and it says winner of 7 Academy Awards, blah 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 blah, and you think, oh well, probably go and watch that then. What it does, what something like that does, is like getting a Michelin star for a restaurant, to our conceptions of what is good, and to our conceptions of not just what is good, but how I relate to it, is really, really fascinating. And therefore, what I choose to associate myself with, what I view taste as being, it gets really deep into the kind of how we judge the cultural world around us. So there should be more academic works on the Oscars, not less. This is what I
agree. I'll say that much. What you're kind of getting at is, I immediately thought of like Pierre Bourdieu talking about symbolic capital, which he refers to as a collective misrecognition. So we've created value around these things. And the way I've always kind of seen it is there's something very silly about the entire act of these, institutions, and the glamour at the awards and the red carpet and all of it, and even the act of giving out these prizes. But there's so much very real like infrastructure and impact that exists around them. And I really like that dichotomy of the events being kind of ridiculous and then exposing how those have really real impacts on the industry, on culture.
I'll give you an example from my perspective of where that happened. So I think it was in 2004. There's a film, and it's so bad that I can't even. You'll know what I'm talking about. It's the film. It was just called, I think it should have been called Racism is Bad. That's the one. That's the one. But we knew that. We knew racism is bad. That we've had that conversation throughout the 20th century and fought at least one world war over it. It's that I just feel that's been answered, and it's an abysmally awful, terrible, hammy, lazy, stupid film, in which in every scene we conclude that racism is still bad. And yet it won. I forget, there was some kind of I'm sure there was intense lobbying for it, and at the Oscars, the gist of that Oscar season was, racism is still bad, and we need to be reminded of this. Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose we kind of do, and generationally, perennially, yes, 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 this is fight the good fight, etc. And when I thought, okay, well, I'll watch this because I agree racism is bad. And I watched the film, and it was like it was an agony. It was such an awful film, and there's some really great people in it as well, which is always the real shame. And I just thought, hold on, I've watched this. I'm sure I've watched this as the result of some kind of intense lobbying effort, and lost 2 hours of my life, which I'll never have back. And but that lobbying effort sort of reaches several thousand miles around the world to where I am here in Wales, and it convinces me to give up that time. Um, so a bit of a kind of a personal example there, but it still does have that huge capacity to influence and shape taste and attitudes.
Yeah. And I mean, the Crash year is notorious because it was up against Brokeback Mountain, which is like an actually really good film, and it
Yeah.
is focused on like queer representation and is just an all-around powerful I know this is an actually good film. I mean, actually, I've taught an awards class, and we'll talk about like we'll do a day of like absolute worst moments in Academy history, and I actually show a clip from Crash. I would never show all of Crash because the way you described it is never getting 2 hours of your life back. But I showed this scene where there's this police officer who early in the film sexually assaults like a woman while pulling over her husband. Like he pulls both of them out of the car and he sexually assaults her. And then she's in a car accident and the car is flipped over and she's trapped in the car, and he arrives at the location and he pulls her out from the car, and at first she sees him and is horrified, and then he saves her, and there's this like swell of music that's really emotional, and you're like,
God.
you watch it back, you're just like, what is this movie saying right now? Like, I
Never,
know,
never judge a book by its cover, eh? You
but
know?
it's being really, really, really emotional about
Uh,
it. But like, this is rather offensive.
yeah,
And I get the gist of the film just from that scene.
it's, it's despicable, absolutely despicable. Well, there we must finish, Monica. It's been a genuine delight to talk to you today, and I would absolutely love it if, when the book is ready, please do come back and we can talk about the Oscars and the film industry in general some more, because I think we barely scratched the surface today. But tune in to the Oscars on Sunday night, and again, if you're buying any Oscar related books, I mean, I'll put a little list of some good ones below. Do remember to buy them from your local retailer. Your local bookshop needs you. Amazon doesn't, and the happier the world will be if we can keep those places going. Thanks so much, Monica, and look forward to speaking to you again about movies at some point in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi everyone, this is Kareem, the voice of Simon Fairchild from the Magnus Archives, and today I want to talk to you about Boost Mobile. Some things quietly drain you, like an expensive phone bill trapping your money month after month. Here's a quick money tip. Stop paying a carrier tax. When you bring your own phone and switch to Boost Mobile's $25 unlimited forever plan, you can unlock up to $600 in savings. That's money that belongs in your life, not trapped in a phone bill. Reclaim those savings for something you're actually into. An EMF meter, a thermal camera, or whatever strange corner of the universe you're currently exploring. Visit boostmobile.com to unlock your savings and take back control. After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers pay $25 per month as long as they remain active on the Boost Mobile Unlimited plan. Boost Mobile January 2026 survey comparing average annual payments of AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile customers to 12 months on the Boost Mobile Unlimited plan. For full offer details, visit boostmobile.com.
To tip off this NBA season on FanDuel, you can choose your own rewards, which means you can play your game any way you want.
I get to choose my rewards?
Yep.
Great! Now, excuse me while I lock in.
All customers choose your own reward right now in the FanDuel app. 21 plus and present in select states. 18 plus in Kentucky. Opt-in required. Rewards are non-withdrawable. Restrictions apply, including bonus and token expiration, leg requirement, and max wager amount. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.